Welcome to all of you to this program, which is sponsored by the Epstein Health Law and Policy Program and also by the Federalist Society. Today's speaker is Professor Josh Blackman, who joins us from the South Texas College of Law and got here 10 minutes ago. And he's here to talk about his exciting new book, Unraveled, Obamacare, Religious Liberty, and Executive Power. And he's going to talk a bit about the book. I offered to make a few preliminary comments after the presentation, and then we're going to open it up for questions and answers. And we're going to plan to run until about 1:15 or.
Well,
if you don't purchase it, you'll be subject to a tax.
It's actually your tax for not having a book. That's how it works. It's a saving construction.
There are subsidized versions at the Amazon.com exchange, and if you have a religious objection to buying the book, you can go talk to the president unless you're a nun. So let's go ahead and welcome Professor Josh Blackman.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here at the University of Illinois, and it's good to be with my good friend Jason, who will actually read the book and provide some helpful comments afterwards. So my new book discusses the Affordable Care Act from 2012 through 2016. And it discusses three primary cases: Hobby Lobby, King v. Burwell, and the Little Sisters of the Poor. But it does so much more than simply talk about the Supreme Court. It also discusses the entire history of the ACA from its beginning. And its beginning actually begins long before President Obama ever took office. President Clinton and First Lady Hillary Rodham Clinton. Now, none of you in this room were even alive at this point, but in 1993, President Clinton charged the First Lady with the task of reforming health care. And First Lady Clinton came up with this plan called the Health Security Act, which would have more or less given every American some right to health insurance. It varied on the specifics, but it was a national health care plan of unprecedented scope. Now, as I'm sure you all know, this plan did not go over very well. Why? Because of these commercials. Anyone remember these commercials? Anyone at all? No one's alive. What were these? Come on. Do you remember these commercials? What were they? Okay, good guess. Indeed, there was a dialogue with healthcare. These were the so-called Harry and Louise ads. It depicted a Midwestern ma and pa sitting at the table talking about health insurance. And they were like, you know, reading this big voluminous book, I don't like this new healthcare plan, right? You know, I like my health insurance now. I like my doctor. I don't want the government coming between me and my healthcare. These ads were so effective at spiking the popularity of what became known as Hillary Care that the entire plan fell apart in less than a year. This defeat taught a very valuable lesson. Okay? If you want to reform health insurance, people have to feel secure that they can keep the insurance that they like, which leads to a very important point about health insurance. Health insurance has three primary attributes: cost, accessibility, and comprehensiveness. I'll give you two, but you can't have all three. If you want insurance to be cheap, it won't be very good, and it won't be available to everyone. If you want insurance to be available to everyone, it will not be cheap, and will probably put limits on benefits. These simple aspects of economics cannot be avoided. But when the Affordable Care Act was being sold, we were sold indeed a bill of goods, that we could get all three, that would be affordable, that it would be comprehensive, and that would be accessible for everyone else. This simply is not possible. And the ACA was sold on this lie with a very simple statement, one repeated nearly 3 dozen times. If you like your insurance, you can keep your insurance. Now, this wasn't just a lie. It was a lie, so don't even get me started on this. But it was a pernicious lie because it created a false sense of security in people, that we can simultaneously give insurance to 30 million new people and in no way affect people who already had insurance. This was frankly impossible. In order to subsidize the cost of these newer people insurance, you make it expensive for others and take away the policy that people perhaps prefer. But no matter, In 2009, 2010, when the ACA was being debated, people weren't really focused on this. We all believe, well, you know what? You have this massive new entitlement and in no way impact how we get health insurance. So the ACA went forward. In the Senate, Majority Leader Reid presided over a 60-vote block. And with that 60-vote block, Republicans were not backing this law at all. The Democrats said, you know what? We don't need any bipartisan buy-in. We will pass this bill on our own, and we'll make this the law. So the bill itself, introduced in December 2009, spanned nearly 3,000 pages. No one read it. Indeed, no one could have read it, for the simple reason that there wasn't enough time. Senator Max Baucus of Montana, who was the chairman of the Finance Committee, bragged. He says, I don't read bills. I pay people to do that for me. Government, your future job will be reading the bills for members of government who vote on them. Very reassuring thought. So December 24th of 2009, the ACA passed the Senate. But there's an important thing to stress about that vote. This wasn't meant to be the final version of the Affordable Care Act. It was really a draft. The idea was let the House pass a version, let the Senate pass a version, then let the House pass a version, and there'll be a conference going back and forth to figure things out, what's good, what's bad, what to keep, what to drop. Right? This is how lawmaking works. But that conference process never happened. Why? Because that summer of 2009, Senator Ted Kennedy had passed away. And Kennedy was the 60th Democratic vote in the Senate. Kennedy was replaced by Scott Brown, a Republican in Massachusetts, who ran on the platform of stopping Obamacare. And with the election of Scott Brown in Massachusetts in January of 2010, a filibuster-proof majority. So that draft bill, which was never meant to be final, now had to be the final bill. If the House made any significant changes, it would then be sent back to the Senate, where we'd be subject to a filibuster, and we'd have no Obamacare. I'd have 2 fewer books to write, and right? But Nancy Pelosi, as Speaker of the House, said, you know what, we can do this. And through what's called the budget reconciliation process, they were able to pass the Senate bill, make a small number of changes, a very small number of changes. The president signed that too. And on a straight party line vote, by a vote of 219 to 210, the ACA passed. And the number I want you to focus on here is the one not actually listed. They do quickly enough, I can make a little zero. Not a single Republican sponsored Obamacare, not a single one. This is salient because Republicans had nothing to do with the law, and they have no problem trying to destroy it. And you'll see today even the decision to repeal and replace Obamacare stemmed from this moment in time when a massive new entitlement was created without any buy-in from the other side. Now, say, wait a minute, Josh, Republicans are being intransigent. They should have supported Obamacare. Why? They didn't like it. It wasn't what the constituents wanted. In fact, it wasn't even a top priority for the electorate in 2009. Energy and national security were much more important. Okay, but they did not back it. And to this day, I keep showing this slide because this explains a lot of where we are right now. No matter, the bill goes to the White House. President Obama signs it. He's smiling, yeah. Enduring forever, this amazing thing. People remember Obamacare and be so happy. Not so fast. Within 9 minutes of the ACA being signed, challenges were filed against the constitutionality of the Affordable Care Act's individual mandate. What was the argument? That Obamacare compels people to buy insurance. It requires people to engage in a commercial transaction. This, the challengers argued, was unconstitutional. If you'd like to read more, read my first book, Unprecedented, the Constitutional Challenge to Obamacare, followed up by Unraveled. Coming in 2020, Undone. You can see where I'm going with this trilogy. So can Congress make you buy broccoli? Can Congress make you buy a book? Can Congress make you buy insurance? Well, the Chief Justice breaks my heart every June said, no, Congress cannot make you buy insurance, but they can tax you if you don't buy it. This was a saving instruction. Congress cannot compel you to engage in commercial activity, but they can tax you for going uninsured. With this, John Roberts saved Obamacare, did a little slice and dice of the Constitution, and that was a subject of my first book, which left us off with the election of 2012. And Governor Mitt Romney, if his little placard looks familiar, ran the platform of repealing and replacing Obamacare. The problem was, this was a significant problem, he was the worst, the absolute worst candidate to run on this question. Why? He basically invented Obamacare. In Massachusetts, as governor, he created what was then known as Romney Care. Working with Jonathan Gruber and Ted Kennedy, he created a health insurance system that looked a lot like Obamacare, with a mandate, with a subsidy, with requirements of this and that. It was basically a preview of the Affordable Care Act. During the 2012 debate, President Obama called Romney the godfather of Obamacare. And you know what? He was right. As we know, the polls were as they were, and Mitt Romney lost election, and President Obama was sworn a second oath. I would have loved to have heard what he and the chief had to say here. I'm sure it was very close. It's like, thanks, buddy, right? But with this, in January 2013, the ACA was saved for the moment. The next wave of challenges affect not the constitutionality of the mandate, but what we frequently call religious liberty, or as I refer to it, as conscience and contraception. Sounds like a really bad Jane Austen novel. So the actual... I just made that one. That's good. I reuse jokes. I try new ones sometimes. That would work well. So during the ACA's debate, the most contentious aspect discussed funding of abortions. And a number of pro-life Democrats, for example, Bart Stupak of Michigan or others, said, we will not support the Obamacare law if it funds abortions. So how did President Obama placate these moderate Democrats? He signed an executive order which said, we will not alter any long-standing prohibitions on abortion funding. Now, all of you know, what is an executive order worth? Nothing, because you can quickly cancel it out. This executive order was really worthless in particular because it said nothing. It simply said, we won't change the status quo, even though the law kind of did, but we'll keep moving on. But this was enough to corral the votes of Senator Stupak and others. And with this, they got to the 219. It's not been persuaded, the ACA would not be here. In fact, there's so many points where the ACA could have died and probably should have died, but through hook or crook, they managed to pass it. And let's see if it keeps going beyond 2017. But the real controversy of religious liberty was not funding of abortions. It was an amendment introduced by Senator Mikulski of Maryland called the Women's Health Amendment. What was the Women's Health Amendment? It said insurers must provide for women without any additional cost, quote, preventive care. What is preventive care? The statute does not define it. And I say, wait, Josh, isn't this the contraception mandate they've heard about, right? Believe it or not, my friends, believe it or not, the Affordable Care Act does not have a contraception mandate. Huh? It has this. All Obamacare says, the actual thing Congress voted on, is that insurers must provide preventive care. How do you go from preventive care to morning after pill? Simple. The statute says, the Health Resource and Service Administration will decide what that means. What is the Health Research Service Administration? Division of HHS, bunch of eggheads, talked to the IOM, Institute of Medicine, and they said, we're going to decide what preventive care means. It's an ambiguous term, and under the Chevron doctrine, they can decide what that means. And we determined that that means the full range of contraceptions, everything from condoms to the diaphragm, to the morning after pill, to the IUD, the entire range. As a consequence, now insurers were required to provide through employee plans all contraception for women. This was an actual advertisement put out by a Colorado government agency encouraging women to sign for Obamacare. I'll read a few. It says, let's get physical. OMG, that's Professor Mazzoni, oh my God. OMG, he's hot. Let's hope he's as easy to get as his birth control. He has his hand in his pocket, she's giving thumbs up. It doesn't leave much to the imagination. But the consequence of making employers pay for birth control is that who is not exempted? Jason? Who? No. You said it before. The nuns. Thank you. The nuns. I'm killing me, Jason. You're killing me. The nuns were not exempted. Indeed, under the first round of accommodations from the Obama administration, of worship, you were required to pay for your employees' birth control pills. And actually, it was even worse than that. Some house of worships weren't exempt. The initial regulation said, you're only exempt if you primarily serve people of your own faith. Whoa. So if you are a church that runs a soup kitchen and you don't check baptismal certificates at the door, you are not religious enough for the Obama administration's first accommodation. Whoa. This freaked out even people like Chris Matthews. Even he was worried. Biden was irate at this. So they had a second round, said, okay, all houses of worship, even if you open your doors to the community, are exempt, but religious charities are not exempt. Okay, that was also very controversial. Another round of accommodations, they've done like 7 or 8 rounds, I've lost count, said, okay, if you're a religious charity, you don't have to pay for it yourself. The insurance company will pay for these contraceptives, but we want you to sign this form. Okay? We want you to sign this form, which allows us to amend your insurance contract to include a provision about birth control. And if you don't sign this form, we'll fine you. So this gave rise to a very contentious debate between the Obama administration and various religious groups, which ultimately yielded the Little Sisters of the Poor controversy. It also yielded a controversy with a for-profit store named Hobby Lobby. We'll come back to these cases in a minute because I want to deviate chronologically and talking about the political ramifications of the Affordable Care Act. Now, if you had seen me give a talk on Obamacare in late 2012 after the election, and I gave many, I would have said, you know, I think the battle over Obamacare is basically over. You know, Obamacare is here forever. Boy, was I wrong, right? This is why my predictions are awful. Listen to absolutely nothing I say about predictions. I'm usually wrong. Because indeed, in the summer of 2013, my junior senator and a federal society member of good standing, Ted Cruz, took to the airwaves saying we need to defund Obamacare. We need to stop Obamacare before it starts. Okay, here was the plan, my friends. Follow me here. Government is funded by what are called appropriation budgets. The budget for the government ended on September 30th, 2013, September 30th. Obamacare, healthcare.gov, opened up October 1st, 2013. It's ready. Budget ends September 30th. Obamacare opens up October 1st. Genius, they thought, Cruz, right? If we defund Obamacare on September 30th, it'll never open for business. Everyone following, right? This was a plan that Cruz and Senator Mike Lee of Utah and others hatched to stop Obamacare before it gets started. There's a significant problem with this plan, though, right? Even assuming that Harry Reid in the Senate would allow a vote on a budget that defunds Obamacare, even assuming President Obama signs this magical budget, even assuming they manage to override the president's veto, Obamacare cannot be defunded. It's like Keith Richards and a cockroach. It'll be here forever. You cannot stop this law. Why? It's funded through what's called a permanent appropriation. What's a permanent appropriation? The only way to stop it is to repeal the entire law. Even if the government shuts down, which it did, Obamacare still stays open. This is why people get their mail during shutdown, why you get your Social Security checks, why you get your Medicare checks. Congress knows certain things are too important to leave to chance, and they're funded independently of the budget. Cruz's plan succeeded. Obamacare would have remained on the books and would have kept churning along and working. But that did not stop him. In a 24-hour feat of strength speech. Now, it wasn't actually a filibuster. I want to dwell on this point for a moment. A filibuster means, like Mr. Smith goes to Washington, you keep talking until you can't talk anymore. Cruz had a hard cutoff of noon the following day because Reid scheduled a vote. A vote was scheduled for about 12 or 1 o'clock. No matter what Cruz did, he cannot delay that vote. This is why the meme that Cruz filibuster shut down the government. No, it didn't. The vote happened was supposed to. Maybe it didn't happen earlier, but did not happen any later. But Cruz, in an amazing feat of strength, was out there for nearly 24 hours. Here he is reading Green Eggs and Ham to his kids who were going to their bedtime story. And if you look closely, this is him the night 1. And after night 2, his tie's down, looking all haggard. I mean, I'm tired up here talking for an hour. I also just drove from O'Hare. But, you know, it's exhausting to have to engage in these sort of feats of strength. This is very impressive. Afterwards, Cruz emerged as a victor, setting up his 2016 presidential campaign, which I advised on and didn't go anywhere. But ultimately, the government did indeed shut down. The House and the Senate were unable to reach an agreement on funding. The most palpable consequence of the government shutdown, of course, are the federal parks. The World War II veteran, the World War II Memorial, D.C., is a national park. And as a result of the shutdown, they closed the park. Now, the brave souls who stormed the beaches of Normandy were not persuaded by these stupid barriers. So you had these veterans coming from across the country who went to the memorial. They lifted up these fences, they carried them across the street, and dropped them on the White House lawn. Come and take it, Barry, right? They were going right at it. But for what it's worth, I have one suggestion to improve budgetary law. During a government shutdown, the parks stay open. The parks stay open because this will actually allow us to have a shutdown. The Grand Canyon was closed. It's a hole in the ground. Mount Rushmore was closed. It's a mountain. Though, somehow Governor Cuomo in New York worked out a deal to keep the Statue of Liberty open. They were able to fund it through state funds. So there's definitely politicking going on as well here. All the red state park was shut down. The blue state park stayed wide open. I digress. But ultimately, all good things must come to an end. The shutdown was not the parks, but was the debt ceiling. You see, at the same time that the government was trying to figure out this government shutdown, we're about to hit the amount of money that Congress appropriated to borrow. And once you hit that ceiling, what's called the debt ceiling, you have to start defaulting on debts. And the Republicans were not willing to let that happen. And at the very end, they caved and funded the entire government and raised the debt ceiling. Not only did they fund the government, they got rid of the sequestration. Sequestration was a cut on spending. That was eliminated. So the entire shutdown experience really accomplished nothing. Book to write about that. That's what the only thing accomplished. But the other aspect of the government shutdown was it shielded what were indeed Obamacare's darkest days. On the same day, October 1st, 2013, that the government shut down, Obamacare opened for business, or at least was supposed to. You see, on the morning of October 1st, 2013, as the government was closing, healthcare.gov opened, or at least it was supposed to. You see, the website didn't work. The government spent nearly $2 billion, $2 billion on a website that did not work. It was an absolute and complete disaster. People were waiting and waiting to sign up, and they couldn't. This was the crowning achievement of the presidency. Barack Obama said this would be like going to Amazon or going to Kayak and buying a policy with ease. It was not that easy. And there was indeed a tough choice to be made. Can this thing be fixed? Because if the website could not be repaired by the deadline to enroll for insurance, people would literally be unable to be insured. Because Obamacare was now the only way of buying insurance for most people in many states. So what happened? The president sent to the nerds. As he called it, the tech surge. You have to name your website IT plan after a failed Iraq strategy. The tech surge. And this wasn't some sort of like a container ship of like nerds from Silicon Valley. It was like 5 guys from Google and Facebook, right? Like it was 5 people. Months, what an entire federal bureaucracy couldn't do in 2 years for $2 billion. And the president promised, please, very pretty please, that by Thanksgiving of 2013, the website would work. And indeed, it worked well enough. Not perfectly, but it worked well enough that starting in December 2013, people were able to log on, enroll, and purchase policies. This was one of the shining moments for the Obama administration, which turned an almost colossal failure into a medium-sized failure, as it were. Because at the same time as all of this was going on, cancellation notices were beginning to trickle through the system. Millions of people, roughly about 4 million people, received letters like this. Oh, Blue Cross Illinois, I'm in the right place. Saying, hey, you had insurance, you maybe liked it, but yeah, we're going to cancel it because it's not consistent with the new healthcare law. This created a massive uproar on Congress and throughout. President Obama's promise that if you like your plan, you keep your plan, was dubbed the lie of the year. I didn't know such a thing existed. Apparently they rate the lie of the year. I mean, politicians lie all the time. Lie so awful is that as he was promising you can keep your plan, his administration was issuing new regulations, making it harder to grandfather plans. At the same time as he was making this lofty promise, he was saying, you can keep your plan. His HHS was issuing regs that said, yeah, you can't really keep your plan. If it changes a little bit, right? The copay tweaks like this, and this change out, you're going to lose your plan. This was pernicious. I don't use that word lightly because this was the reason why Obamacare was passed. But for this promise, right, law students, but for, I don't think the EC would have been passed. We have a Hillary Care Part 2. Maybe we have President Romney at this point. We'd be living in a very, very, very different world. But now with canceled plans, indeed, people had no choice but to enroll. You walk down to your local Obamacare store. I don't know where this is. Actually, I was trying to look it up one time. This Obamacare store exists somewhere, and you can walk in and get insurance. But after several months, the president had a crowning achievement. 8 million. 8 million Americans signed up for Obamacare. Now let's put this number in perspective. Roughly 4 million of those had their policies canceled, so I don't think they were too happy to have to buy a new one. Also, another important factor is that people who sign up for Obamacare don't actually pay for it. Oh, well, believe me, people sign up, get treatment, and drop coverage. Roughly 10% of these, right, maybe about 1 million, give or take, didn't pay all the way through the year. They simply dropped their coverage, never paid at all. So these numbers should always be taken with a grain of salt. But indeed, people did sign up. The website was functional. And today we are at the point, I think I had 11 or 12 million people in my last count have signed up. That may sound impressive, government estimates. The government estimated that by 2016, 20 million people would have signed up to Obamacare, 20 million. The actual number, about 11 or so. So they're barely halfway where they're supposed to be. And you wonder why prices are so high. Not enough people have entered the marketplace to spread the risk and cover all these new sick people in the marketplace. So the fatal conceit, to quote my favorite economist, Hayek, is rearing its head much earlier than expected. I digress. Let's go back to the Supreme Court and talk about religious liberty. Our discussion actually begins with a case called Employment Division versus Smith, which I'm sure Professor Mazzoni has taught to his students. The case involves a guy, Native American, by the name of Al Smith. And as part of his religious ritual, he used peyote. This was like a hallucinogenic cactus. He was fired from his job. Coincidentally, he worked as a drug counselor. Probably a problem if you do peyote, but they fired him from his job. He then applied for unemployment benefits from the state of Oregon. He was denied coverage, saying, look, you were fired for using a controlled substance. We are not giving you any employment benefits. He appeals to the Supreme Court. And in a very controversial decision by none other than Justice Scalia, the court held no go. The courts will not create an exemption. If the state bans the use of a controlled substance, it's not targeting Native Americans, it's not targeting Baptists, the general law of applicability, the state can ban it. I like this decision. And they attempted to reverse it with a statute. Yes, Congress can indeed pass statutes. They used to. This was passed nearly unanimously. I think it was a voice vote in both houses. President Clinton signed that. That's Orrin Hatch and a much younger Chuck Schumer. And the bill was called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. So by its name, it was supposed to restore religious freedom. How exactly? Well, unclear. It didn't work out perhaps as designed. The court says, if the government wants to impose a substantial burden on your religion, they have to have a really good reason for doing it, and they have to use the least restrictive means possible. That is, if we can do it in way A or way B, and way A is less restrictive, that means you can't use way B. It accomplishes the same goal. The Supreme Court struck this law down in part in a case called Bernie v. City of Flores, as applied to the states. Okay, the court said states cannot be sued for this. This is beyond Congress's powers. But it still applies to the federal government. And it was on this basis that Hobby Lobby challenged the contraceptive mandate. Now, Hobby Lobby started as a small business making picture frames in the garage of David and Barbara Green. The business expanded, and they now have locations across the country. A small note to digress. For my first book, I mailed copies of my book to all the justices, and I got letters back from 4 or 5 of them, and I framed them at Hobby Lobby. So I have my letter from Justice Sotomayor framed in a Hobby Lobby frame. I'm sure she would appreciate that very much. But indeed, even though they have locations throughout the country, it is not publicly traded. It is indeed closely held. The husband and wife are the co-founders. And this may look like an Easter card, but it's indeed a picture of the board of directors. You see, everyone who owns Hobby Lobby is in a trust, and they're all family members. They all share the same religious beliefs, the same values. They don't open on Sunday. And so what? You lose a lot of business when you close on Sundays. You're actually leaving a lot of money on the table. But that is a religious conviction. They also have another religious conviction. They oppose 4 forms of birth control. Not the birth control pill, but the IUDs and what are called the emergency contraceptives, Plan B and Ella. And they say, we can't put these on our insurance plan and force us to purchase these drugs. The Obama administration said, hey, you corporation, you don't have any religious rights. We can make you do whatever we want. And oh, by the way, even if we can't, it doesn't burden your religion to buy someone else's birth control. So this case goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. And one of my favorite pastimes when we discuss Supreme Court cases is showing the signs on the street outside the Supreme Court. This one was my favorite. It says, if men could get pregnant, birth control will be gumball flavored. I'm sorry, birth control will be from gumball machines and be bacon flavored. And in my dear second, my mom's not ready to be a grandma. That one's also in the back. This is not a church. This is a craft store. This is not a healthcare plan. She is dressed up as a pack of birth control pills, if you can imagine. And no bosses in my bedroom. Hobby Lobby would agree. They don't want to be in your bedroom, nor they want to fund your activities. But this I think misses the mark a bit. Contraception is my business. I think Hobby Lobby would agree with that. It is your business, but pay for it yourself. Corporations are not friends, or not people, my friends. Oh, this one's my favorite. Anyone know what she's holding in her hand? A crocheted uterus, winner, winner, right? There was actually a campaign to crochet uteruses. They did not buy the yarn on Hobby Lobby. But they crocheted uteruses, and they mailed them to Hobby Lobby headquarters with a note saying, mess with this uterus, not mine. There it is, right? And she answered there. Hobby Lobby, this uterus is for you. Keep your hobby, that's my ovaries. The pro-life signs are never quite as interesting. I'm pro-life, team life, you know. Not quite, but these guys had it going. They were actually wearing kilts on a freezing, snowing day in Washington, D.C. Yes, they were blowing bagpipes. It was quite the scene. The arguments in the court was argued by Paul Clement for the Hobby Lobby and Don Verrilli, who was the Solicitor General for the government. The first challenge for the case concerned, well, can a corporation exercise religion? And I want to urge you to not say no. And I'll explain to you why. Every house of worship you belong to, a church, a synagogue, whatever, a mosque, they're all corporations. Why do they incorporate? There are certain benefits with respect to tax, with respect to liability. The mere fact that you choose the corporate form does not mean you don't have any religious rights. If you're a kosher butcher and you choose to incorporate, could the state pass law saying you can't use the kosher method of slaughter? I think the answer is no. The issue, and this is what the court ultimately resolved in, is how big of a corporation can you be before you lose this sort of right? And if you're publicly traded, it's going to be really hard for your corporation to have a single religious identity. But if you're closely held like the Greens, where everyone on your family goes to church together on Sundays, you can establish that pretty quickly. Indeed, I think it was either Sotomayor or Kagan who said, to Paul Clement, you really got the perfect plaintiffs here. And he replied, my plaintiffs didn't want this. The government brought them to this. Like this was not something that was, filed as some sort of a, test case, right? They came after they're being enforced against. The second question was actually a little bit more difficult, right? Does it burden your religion to pay for a product you deem sinful, right? No one's forcing Barbara Green to take an IUD, right? No one's forcing Barbara Green to pop the birth control pill. They're simply saying you have to pay for others to do it. And this question, the court split 5-4. Justice Alito had the majority opinion, saying, yes, it does impose a substantial burden to force you to pay for something you deem sinful. The dissenter said, no one's making you use it. You're simply paying. In civil society, we pay for a lot of things we don't like. We pay taxes that fund wars. We do lots of things that we may find objectionable. But that was a 5-4 issue. The case turned, as it always does, and I think will continue to do, on the vote of Justice Kennedy. Justice Kennedy found important the fact that if this birth control is so important, the government can maybe find a different way of providing it rather than making Hobby Lobby pay for it. Maybe you have an exemption, maybe you put on the Obamacare exchange, maybe you do something else. And on this narrow concurrence from Justice Kennedy, Hobby Lobby was victorious. The notorious RBG, as she likes to be known, was in dissent. By the way, I think this was the case where Ruth lost it. I think this was actually the moment in time when she was with Katie Couric that she actually went off the deep end. As it were, this is actually her dissenting jabot. She wears these neck collars. And this is the one she wears when she's in dissent. As perhaps a point of reference, she wore this the day after the election. So you can see what was on her mind. She's probably the least popular person right now in D.C., and I hope she thinks I'd better live another 8 years or so. She made that wrong calculation. Exactly. any event, the pro-lifers were proud, they were happy, and they were victorious. They don't win too many cases in the Supreme Court. Let's move on to the second case I would like to discuss. Less salacious, but more fundamental, King v. Burwell. Under the Affordable Care Act, states were given the option of creating an exchange, right? I don't think Illinois did, New York did, California did. States were given the option of creating a healthcare exchange. If a state declined to build their own exchange, because they can't be required to, the federal government would create an exchange as a fallback, right? This is federalism 101, right? You can't make a state do something. If they fail to do it, you fall back on the federal exchange, right? No big problem. Except when you actually look at the text of the statute. This is section 36B of the EC. It's a little small, so I'll read it. Oops. It says, in relevant part, subsidies will be available, quote, blah, 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 per health plan that was, here's the key part, enrolled in through an exchange established by the state. Subsidies are available for plans that were enrolled in through an exchange established by the state. Now, reading this, one might think that it means that subsidies are available in exchange established by the state. That would mean that on the New York Exchange, you get these great subsidies that make healthcare cheaper. On the federal exchange, healthcare.gov, when it's actually working, there will be no exchange of subsidies. The Obama administration didn't realize this language could possibly be construed in this manner until a benefits lawyer named Tom Christina in South Carolina pointed it out. And they freaked out, like, oh my God, someone actually read the statute. Someone actually read the damn thing. Crap, we're in trouble now. So the Obama administration issued a rule which says, and I'm not being egregious, state exchanges will be treated identically to the federal exchanges in all purposes, notwithstanding this language. Okay? I don't need to walk you through all the various permutations. I don't want to keep you here all day. But the long and short of it is, this rules, IRS rules, challenged in court. And the challengers, one who was Jacqueline Halbig, another one was the Hearsts, and they asserted, no, established by the state means established by the state, and you cannot provide these payments on the federal exchange. What would the effect be? Well, by this point, nearly 36 states relied on the federal exchange. And were you to eliminate the subsidies on the federal exchange, Obamacare would be paid full price, and it's unaffordable. You see, the premiums that people pay for Obamacare, for most people, is not the actual price. It's heavily subsidized by we pay the full price, we get no subsidies. Now, the dirty secret is, if you make more, say a family of four making more than $100,000 a year, you get no subsidies, you pay the full rate. That's why enrollment's plummeting. But for people who get the subsidies, they'll be unable to afford it. Lawsuits are filed in a couple different places. The Fourth Circuit ruled for the government. The DC Circuit ruled for the challengers. And with that, the case goes to the Supreme Court in the second big challenge, case called King v. Burwell. How would the Supreme Court take Obamacare in this next major challenge, right? Although Hobby Lobby was about Obamacare, it wasn't a fundamental attack on the law itself, right? Hobby Lobby goes one way or the other. Obamacare chugs along. If this case was victorious for the challengers, you'd have people across the country who would, as you signs helpfully point out, probably lose their health insurance because they can no longer afford it without the subsidies. The case was argued by Mike Carvin for the challengers, and once again, Don Verrilli for the plaintiffs. What happens? Well, it's June. That means John Roberts is about to break my heart. He does it every year. The Chief Justice wrote for 6-3 court that the government win. He admitted that the text, right, the plain meaning of the text is strong. This was the word he used, right? Established by the state means established by the state, right? He admitted that is strong. However, he said, when you read it in context with everything else in the statute, this 3,000-page statute that no one bothered reading, the statute that was a draft that wasn't meant to be final, you reveal a very carefully woven plan to have this integrated system where the subsidies are an essential part whether you buy it in a state or federal exchange. Roberts said, the purpose of the ACA is to improve health insurance, not destroy it, and we will read it with that presumption in mind. Justice Scalia dissented in what would be his last dissent read from the bench. He renamed the law, no, not Obamacare, but SCOTUS care. Because not once, but twice was the law rewritten by the Supreme Court of the United States. But all the usual rules of statutory interpretation seem not to apply when Obamacare is at issue. With that, the ACA was saved. And if you'd asked me, I thought that was the last big blow to Obamacare. Well, that happened about 4 days ago, the actual one. Move forward. Challenge, which I hinted at before, involves the nuns, the little sisters of the poor. This is an order of nuns that tend to the elderly. They run these retirement homes, hospice care, right? Seniors who are too sick to care for themselves live in this home and live out their remaining years of lives with dignity. People. I actually had the honor of going to a lunch with the Little Sisters after the case was argued. I was in this room full of nuns. It felt like a casting call for the Sound of Music. It was pretty cool because they all came to the Supreme Court. They were all in their get-ups, the habit and everything. I'm Jewish. I don't know what I'm talking about. This was the most nuns I'd ever seen in my life. I mean, what am I doing here? I don't know. Guys in the robe at the Supreme Court. I think it was surreal. Go to the court. Pro tip though, if you ever go to the Supreme Court and you want to sit in the lawyer section, you must wear a jacket. I think they were exempted because they were robes, as it were. The case was argued again by Paul Clement and Don Verrilli. Adding a third face was Noel Francisco, who argued for the Little Sisters and the various other plaintiffs. So I was at the court that day. I was actually sworn into the Supreme Court bar that morning, which was a pretty cool occasion. And you want to know what? The arguments were really divided. They were really divided, and they were dividing over this issue. And the issue is very clear. The justices seem to be aware that making the nuns sign some piece of paper that results in the provision of health care that they find sinful is problematic, right? But they also seem to have a very strong awareness that women had some sort of statutory entitlement to health insurance involving birth control. They didn't. The statute was silent. Let's put that aside for now, right? How else could the government have given such insurance to women seamlessly? The nuns said, well, let the women sign for a separate plan, right? Let them go on Obamacare, sign for a birth control only plan. Don't use my plan. Don't hijack our plan, they said. And the government said, well, wait a minute. That imposes a burden on women, and your religious right doesn't go that far. The case was argued. The nuns came down the steps. It was an amazing sight. You had basically hundreds of Catholic school boys and girls cheering for the nuns. The sign said, let them serve, and I'll have none of it, which is my favorite sign. I hope you got that one. That's Sister Lorraine, who I met during the lunch. So what happened? John Roberts broke my heart again. It's every June without fail. The court does something very strange here. They first asked for additional briefing, which is very rare. They said, we want extra briefing on the question of whether there's some other way. Is there some other way that the nuns can not be burdened and women can get these health insurance? There's some other way. So the parties submitted an additional briefing where they basically said, well, there might be something we can do, but not really. The government wants the same insurance policy. The nuns want a different insurance policy. The Supreme Court resolved that dispute. They pretended it didn't exist. They issue a very strange 8-page per curiam decision saying, well, the parties came to us so they can have a compromise worked out. Go figure it out, you guys. Remand it to 8 different lower courts of appeals. Come back to us when we have a 9th justice. Indeed, it's exactly what happened. They simply remanded it, hoping that this problem goes away. The nuns were happy because they didn't lose. I'll tell you what. At the time, I thought this is insane. This problem will come right back to the court. It probably won't. Why? Because going forward, my friends, going forward, the ACA is on very shaky footing. I told you the first book was called Unprecedented. The second book was called Unraveled. The third will be called Undone. Why? Much of the Affordable Care Act has been instituted through executive action. As I've said more times I can count, what Barack Obama's pen and phone giveth, Donald Trump's Sharpie and Twitter taketh away. The contraceptive mandate, again, is not in the statute. It's very easy for a Trump administration, if it's so inclined, who the hell knows, right? But it's very easy if it's so inclined to be, you know what, we're going to exempt the nuns. We'll exempt them. Case goes away. We're going to rescind. That case goes away also. There's so much litigation that's currently on the Supreme Court's docket that will simply disappear after January 20th. So while I thought wrongly that much of President Obama's legacy is probably entrenched, I think the title of my third book will go a long way to see how much of it will be undone. Thank you so much. I welcome your attention and look forward to Jason's questions as well. Thank you.
Great. So thank you so much. This is it's a really wonderful achievement. This book, I recommend it. It tells a story of the subject that's inherently boring and federal statute, and yet makes it interesting, indeed, I would say almost gripping. It's a page turner, and so that's good. And it's also dealing with something that is happening right now. So it's very hard to write that kind of history of the very recent past. I write about the 1780s, 1790s. There's no way to question what you say, but the characters are all here and around. So that also makes this project impressive. So that's enough by way of pleasantries. I guess the one reaction I would have, Josh, is you say John Roberts breaks your heart every June, and that's because you don't have the right reference point, right? So you start the book with Hillary and Clinton's and Hillary Care. Hillary is working secretly on this new healthcare plan that has been appointed. The Clintons have been talking about you getting 2 presidents for the price of 1, and none of that goes over very well. So if that's where you start, right, with Hillary Care, and then move on to Obamacare, then there is a sense that there's something new about all of this, a sort of a departure from existing arrangements. It's almost kind of un-American for all of this to be in place. So that's not the right starting point. What is the right starting point? It's the New Deal, right? The New Deal is a series of economic and social reforms in the 1930s. And if you understand Obamacare as coming out of the constitutional settlement of the New Deal, there's nothing particularly unusual about it. So the New Deal does lots of things. There's all kinds of federal and state governmental programs that are a kind of welfare, right? You don't get Scandinavia, but you get sort of American-style welfare. Lots of programs that are supporting the unemployed, food stamp programs, with the Social Security Act of 1935. Various kinds of subsidies to prop up agricultural prices, lots of programs to support employees, in terms of their bargaining with employers, programs to guarantee wages, and so on and so forth. And a lot of this is being done through redistribution, right? Taxes to shift wealth from some people to others. And there is a massive fight over the constitutionality of all of these kinds of programs, challenges to the scope of the authority of the federal government to engage in this sort of welfare, these sorts of welfare programs. Challenges also based on individual liberty, both with respect to these programs at the federal level and similar programs that are being put in place at the states. And those challenges lose, right? And we get out of the New Deal a new kind of constitutional arrangement in which it is accepted going forward that the federal government has massive authority to engage in these sort of social welfare initiatives, not constrained by anything much except for politics. Rejection also on sort of individual liberty kinds of challenges as well. And importantly, what is the big tool that the federal government has to do this? It's the power to tax, right? So out of the New Deal settlement, this is understood as a pro-tax document. A pro-tax document. Right? The very first thing on the Article 1, Section 8 list is what? It's the power that Congress has to tax, right? Power to lay collect taxes, to provide for the common defense and general welfare. Echoes back to the preamble of the Constitution, which also talks about the purpose being to promote the general welfare. So pro-tax document, pro-tax federal government, and the powers of the federal government to tax are enhanced, right, in a very of the 16th Amendment in 1913, which comes a progressive year, a couple of decades earlier, which removes the earlier requirement that you had to impose taxes in ways proportional to the population of the states. No, now Congress can go after you directly and collect taxes upon your income. And this is key to the New Deal reforms, right? Key to what Congress is doing. And the Supreme Court accepts, right, that this power of taxation is extremely, not unlimited, but extremely broad. And so subsequent kinds of legislative measures, Medicare, Medicaid, 1965, are built upon the same kind of premise. So you can understand, actually I'm offering an alternative account myself, but offering an alternative account, you can understand the Affordable Care Act is falling within this, with this framework, and then a tax on it as an effort to engage in a transformation, right? Revolutionary activity against the constitutional regime that has emerged with the New Deal. And so here I think a quote from President Obama that Professor Blackman, in several places in his book, is quite useful. So last year, Obama said the Affordable Care Act is part of the fabric of how we care for one another. He isn't just saying that that's because the Affordable Care Act at that point has been around years, and we're used to it. He's slotting it into the post-New Deal constitutional settlement in which the government does have power to engage in these kinds of forms of risk redistribution in order to promote what it thinks is in the welfare of the people, to take care of the population. And President Trump, right, so don't be so, when we think about what's going to happen going forward, President Trump understands this framework as well. So listen to this. Quote, everybody's got to be covered. I'm going to take care of everybody. I don't care if it costs me votes or not. Everybody's going to be taken care of much better than they're taken care of now. Who is that? Is it Bernie Sanders? No, it's Donald Trump, right? Understanding that this is part of the constitutional,
I can't win. I really can't.
Framework. Now, maybe the Affordable Care Act is in some ways a further step, like the individual mandate, unprecedented, as Professor Biden had said. But the point of comparison needs to be the New Deal settlement, not Hillary Care. Similar kind of story you can tell with respect to executive power. I think one of the real strengths of this book is to point out to trace all of the things that are happening in the executive branch to deal with some of the problems that are arising as this thing gets rolling. And yes, executive power is a concern. The Hobby Lobby decision, I think, is much about separation of powers and what's happening in the administrative branch as it is about religious liberty. But if you're thinking about this being a problem of overreach, then it has to be well compared to what? Certainly if it's compared to 1789 or compared to 1889, yes, it looks like the executive branch and the agencies under it are doing all kinds of novel things. But because the story that we're told is that Congress enacts the laws, the executive's role is to enforce them, the courts interpret laws in the course of adjudicating disputes, but that's not our system, right? That's not our system because we have a massive administrative state in which these rules are altered. And so listen to Chief Justice Roberts, your heartbreaker, right? He says, although this is a recent decision, Arlington versus FCC, although modern administrative agencies fit most comfortably within the executive branch, as a practical matter, they exercise legislative power by promulgating regulations with the force of law, executive power, right, thing that we're used to them doing, and judicial power by adjudicating enforcement actions and imposing sanctions. The accumulation of these powers in the same hands is not an occasional or isolated exception to the constitutional plan. It is a central feature of modern American government. Right? Laws are made, for the most part, administrative scholars people don't like to say this, they're made by executive agencies. Right? That's where most lawmaking is made. If you're a lawyer and your client wants to set up a factory, wants to know what the federal law is with respect to the environmental issues, and all you do is flip through or read carefully the Clean Air Act, malpractice, right? Malpractice because you have to understand, in order to give your client the answer, all of the hundreds of thousands of regulations that the EPA has generated that have the force of law. Right? And the administrative state is also a product of the New Deal era, with roots in the progressive era a few decades earlier. You get the creation in this period of all of these agencies, this kind of alphabet soup of agencies that are given very significant powers by Congress. And again, these things are challenged in the 1930s, challenged on the ground that Congress is handing over lawmaking power, challenges with respect to the president's authority to appoint people who are essentially doing things that look like law making, and the challenges ultimately are rejected. Right? We accept the administrative state as a part of our constitutional arrangement.
Speak for yourself.
Now, maybe, right, so maybe the executive action under the ACA is a step further, but the measure of it has to be against executive powers of the modern administrative state, or else the criticism has to be understood, again, as a revolutionary effort, right? An effort to turn back that constitutional settlement. Some people think the administrative state, the whole thing is unconstitutional and should go, but that's an effort at transformation, right? That's a revolution. It's not an argument that fits neatly within our current constitutional scheme. Going forward, I just want to say one quick thing. This, again, I think very interesting to see how much of this is undone, right? So that's going to be the intrigue going forward. But one thing occurred to me when I was thinking about the sort of New Deal comparison. In the New Deal, there were these 3 R's that were important, that were talked about: relief, recovery, reform. Relief for the unemployed, recovery of the economy, and reform of the financial system. And when we get to our president, Trump, right, he's first talking about repeal. We're going to repeal, right, the Affordable Care Act. I would be very surprised if you see a federal statute that says the Affordable Care Act is hereby repealed, right, signed Donald J. Trump, and that's it, right? That's not likely to happen. And Trump has signaled it's not that likely to happen because he said repeal, and here's my second R, repeal and replace, and do so simultaneously, so nobody, and so there's no kind of coverage gap, right? So repeal and replace your second R, what's your third R? Well, he likes some of the things from the Affordable Care Act. I think we well, some of the things from the Affordable Care Act, and we're going to retain those, right? So repeal, replace, simultaneously retain. Again, a new set of 3 R's that we can keep our eye on, and we'll see what the balance is as we go forward. So that's what I have. And questions and answers, you think?
Yes,
yeah, let's do that. Who wants to go first?
If you're basing everything as a government based on this idea of how we take care of each other, there are literally no limits. Because at that point, the government mandate that everybody shall eat tofu and brown rice and vegetation nowadays, and there are absolutely no limits. It's not just taxation, it's absolutely everything.
Sounds like
And also, if you're saying that, which is correct, the administrative agencies are the ones that are really making a lot of rules. But if you're saying that is fine, we don't need the balance of powers, then really, it's the president runs agencies who have now codified essentially a dictatorship, which really only will be changed, perhaps, by election or
coup.
Yes.
So James Madison once wrote that the aggregation of the legislative, judicial, executive, one person is the very definition of tyranny. Tyranny. I was going to interrupt you. I didn't want to when you were saying the 3 branches. Look, I don't need to revisit the New Deal here. Jason, I can argue about that at some month later. But the long and short of it is the ACA was an expansion of power. It went beyond that. It attempted to give Congress power not only to regulate activity, but regulate inactivity. At least John Roberts said you cannot do that. I discussed the New Deal at some length in my first book. There's this great story. Yeah, it's Helving versus Davis. Now, you may know this was this massive new program. And when FDR was considering this old age relief program, he said, well, do I make this a regulation of commerce? Do I make this a tax? And we were debating this. And there's this great story in my first book where Chief Justice Stone was at a party, and Francis Perkins was the labor secretary. And Francis Perkins goes over to Stone, totally appropriate, like, we have this bill coming down the pipe. What do you think about it, Mr. Justice? And Stone comes over and it says, "My dear, the taxing power is all you need. Don't make it a regulation of commerce, make it a taxing power case." And indeed, Social Security was styled as a taxing power, and the court upheld in that case in Pelver. And that's exactly what John Roberts did. So the taxing part, my first book, Jason, he comes to this, he went to Harry Potter 2 and didn't read Harry Potter 1, right? So through the first book, I discussed the deal ad nauseum, more than I care what it did.
No one's going to force you to eat tofu. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I actually stopped eating broccoli because of Obamacare. I can't look at it. I serve on the plate, I take it off my plate because of, thanks, Obama. Next question.
How much could Trump potentially or repeal or remove?
Let me say Cruz, because I know what Trump has in mind, but assuming President Cruz had been elected, which is people want, a lot. So President Obama hasn't actually enforced individual mandate. He suspended it for millions. He can suspend it, period. President Obama hasn't actually fully enforced the employer mandate. He can suspend it, period. Various cost-sharing supplements being paid to insurance companies, which are illegal, cut those off. Stop enrollments on the exchanges. I mean, without a single statute, Obamacare could be gutted in 5 seconds. I don't think, and I think Jason's right, I don't think that's going to happen. Whatever this transitional device looks like will be there. We have a preview of this from King v. Burwell. There was a brief time where the court may have invalidated the core of Obamacare, and there were various plans to go on an off-road or an off-ramp or something like that. There are transitional devices. Believe it or not, there are smart people working in public administration. We didn't know it, but they exist. So I think there are paths of cutting out some of the most onerous aspects of Obamacare, and perhaps making this not an absolute disaster. Questions? You have to have class, don't you?
Do you feel that,
Thank you.
that this is leading more towards a single-payer system for the entire country?
If you asked me that question last week, I would have said yes. I don't know the answer today. Trump has actually been a proponent of single payer. I have an entire chapter in a book called Make Healthcare Great Again. When I wrote it, I didn't know what it was going to be about yet. I wrote this before the primary was over. But he's been a proponent of single payer. He praises Scotland, right? He praises Denmark. He praises these things. Who the hell knows? I really have no idea. It won't be called the Affordable Care Act. That's sure. They'll change the name. It'll be called Trump Care with the gold-plated, banner. It'll be amazing. It'll be terrific. It'll be amazing. Terrific. Other questions? Jason, thank you so much.
Thank you. Please,
Wow. Wow, that's hard. Thank you so much.
employer, my boss, they have like legislation. Because it is their function, they don't want thank you so much. And I wanted to know. Okay.
Thanks for your help. Appreciate it.
Got
Got everything worked out today.
No, that's good.
Sometimes